it's great for bands and groups that can be amplified and the sound can be mixed, but yeah, the choir, it sounds great to the congregation. It's very challenging to hear and to.
Really?
I mean, they basically just have to watch me, and that's it. Because what they're hearing from the piano is totally different from what's happening in the bass section there.
So for a choir, the reverberation doesn't come back in a consistent fashion for them?
Right. Now, it sounds great to sit out in the congregation, but it's very difficult to hear.
So the sound just goes out and it doesn't come back.
Right.
It comes back slightly later.
Right. You know, and it's similar with an orchestra. We've had small chamber orchestras in here, and it sounds great in the hall, but the feedback is very different than what they're used to.
They almost need monitors even if they're not amplified.
Yeah. Well, that's what we got Sam for.
We're live, by the way.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So maybe I'll get out a picture. It's not part of the performance.
So are you doing a broadcast?
Yes, the live stream. And sometimes what we do at concerts here is we have like pre-concert talks. Sometimes we talk about the music in the middle of the program. I'm throwing all this there, who's not done this with me before. So, you know, depending on the size of the crowd, we might just talk about it. You know, we'll play something and then ask questions.
That's great.
We'll have so many musicians in the crowd, and among whoever shows up, we'll have a good discussion.
Now, what are the boxes underneath? Are those speakers or what are those?
That's the Hungerford system.
Oh, wow. That's
Yes.
so cool.
Isn't it?
And so is that electrically run? Is that going all the time? Or?
Yep.
And that's just
regularly putting water in the piano, which sounds like the most counterintuitive thing in the world.
Is that, I don't think I've ever noticed, is that a normal thing? Or is it just in environments where it's dry or what?
I mean, what did you say? Yeah.
It's very normalized now.
Really?
I
Yeah.
mean, I grew up with one in my mom's piano. So.
Oh, really?
So they have a built-in, and is it like, it doesn't blow? How does the moisture get inside? What is the process? Is there some sort of fan or something, or is it?
I don't know technically. I know that ours we need to keep an eye on the pads that absorb the humidity. Do you know how it actually works?
Unfortunately, no.
So is
That's like
I just put the water in.
that's what like, when I get a question about the violins, I just play it.
Yeah.
so for some part of the year is the humidifier, the rest of the time is it the humidifier, or is it just the humidifier?
It's always humidified. I mean, I guess the antithesis would be if you had a piano and a piano. And I'm thinking about, do you ever do any recording with David Pasbury? it's not as martinis for both sustain the way Hungerford does, then absolutely. Hello, welcome. Then yes, he'd have written for it.
Yeah, but you know, the basic violin has nonetheless stood the test. Although I'm sure that there are people developing new instruments now that, you know, string, I'm sure there are all sorts of wild string instruments that are out there now.
Well, and you're right.
Not just electronic, but just
Right.
design, mechanics.
Well, so my luthier, my instrument, Hiroshi Izumo, is the inventor of a viola model that is very distinctive. You may have seen these instruments where they're almost built like double basses, smaller than the full size bass with the sloped shoulders. And if you see them, have you seen these things? A couple members of the Philadelphia Orchestra play them. You can tell that they're Zuba violas. It's what he's known for. Because he's actually altered the shape. And I mean, all these times I've seen it, I've never thought to actually ask him why. But apparently it is a way to mitigate the acoustical imperfections of this instrument that's considered acoustically imperfect.
For that design, it's a way of countering the fact that the wall levels are being small.
Well, there's that too.
They've lost a lot of the big Wolfram qualities of big instruments.
People want to play the 17, 18 inch violas.
Yeah,
Right.
but now we're doing all kinds of design to get that sound.
Sure.
You know, on the other end of that,
I brought you the same.
Wonderful.
That's an impersonation.
Exactly. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. I'm David Brown. I'm the music director here at MLUC Church. This is my friend Hungerford, who will be playing piano this evening. Welcome to what is technically the inaugural performance of the Illumine concert series 2025-2026. This is our relatively new concert series, now boasting 30 performances between now and the end of June, which is a little nuts. But this is all to say, you're very much welcome to come back. If you enjoy the music tonight, or if you don't, there will be something that you probably like, because we represent music across all genres, myriad performing ensembles. It's been a joy to kind of develop my role as music director here into a concert producer role. Our community, if you're a guest to Mainline Unitarian, we are a progressive faith community that aspires to transform lives through love, service, and our welcoming faith. But as some of you know, joke about this, I would add, if I could, to our mission statement, music as well. Because we have a very robust complement of music. Thank you. Yes. It's a big part of what we do here. And one of the most important things to me to communicate to folks who come to hear a concert is that if you're here because you appreciate music in some capacity, or at least you have a curiosity. We are all about feeding and satisfy these curiosities here at MLUC. We have so many ways for you to get involved in music. A lot of people would identify themselves as music appreciators, and maybe you've always wanted to sing or always wanted to play an instrument. This community is kind of a blank canvas for that kind of exploration. So if you have an interest in becoming more involved in music or getting to know more about the music that we create around here, please chat with me after the concert or during our brief intermission as we take a breath before we have to play Brahms Sonata. Our program this evening was sort of a wonderful coincidence because Aaron and I met at the memorial service of Dr. Vincent Craig, who is our music director, up until he passed away 2 years ago, the day after tomorrow, actually. And we reconnected. Aaron is a student of Vincent's. I was a longtime friend of Vincent's. I grew up in this community. And we decided that we needed to collaborate to play something together. And so we've been kind of talking about this on and off for a while. And then, I don't know, was it 6 months ago?
Yeah.
We decided that we were going to do this. We had to cancel one program due to scheduling difficulties. We finally landed on a date for the fall. And I threw this monstrous repertoire at Aaron because I always wanted to play it. Not really thinking about the personal impact on a person who actually has to play this stuff. Not much thought to what I have to do as well. But I will say that it has been such a joy to get to know this music. It's truly a transformative program, I think. And I don't just say this because we're the ones playing, because objectively, this is the kind of music I play for people who say they hate classical music. Because it is so compelling. It's quite diverse. So on this program, you're going to hear works first by Germaine Tailleferre, then Ernest Bloch. We're going to take a little bit of time, and then 2 little pieces by Lili Boulanger, and finally Johannes Brahms, the most famous composer on the program. And we're going to talk a little bit about all of these pieces so that you have some context. The last thing I'd say is I want to encourage you all to engage with us. So maybe after we perform the block, Aaron, you should go rest after that. But I'm going to stick around if any of you have questions. We like to talk about music around here. I like to talk about music around here. And people are generous enough to entertain my proclivity. So feel free, if you have questions, Ask them. If you feel moved to applaud, please clap. If you feel moved to, I don't know, cheer, please cheer. I don't love the stodgy rules about when you applaud between movements. Make it that as you will. You clap when you feel it's appropriate. The last thing I would say is on your way in, there was a basket. This is how we fund our Illumine concerts. There's no actual budget here. Whatever you contribute is the money that Aaron's going to walk away with. Now, I say this. I don't want to make him say it. But he's put in a ton of time. So if you find you're really enjoying the program, maybe drop a little bit more in the basket on your way up. Only 10% comes back to MLUC to cover HVAC and custodial costs. So, the first piece on our program. This is the first sonata by Germaine Tailleferre. Tailleferre is a name that I suspect. How many of you have heard the name Tailleferre? I knew it was going to be you, Barbara. The violinist in the room. She was a member of Les Six, and Les Six was, at the time, the most influential group of composers in France around the middle of the 20th century. Some of the more notable composers in this group include Milhaud, Poulenc, Honegger. I don't even remember the other two. Anyway, those are the famous ones. And Tailleferre is not a household name composer, and it's a damn shame. She was the only female member of Les Six. Her music, to me, and you can weigh in on this, Aaron, too, I've never heard anything quite like it before. It feels almost as though she carried the tradition of, or the lineage of Debussy forward, where the other composers in Les Six, predominantly I would identify more as spiritual successors to Ravel. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, and I would also add that every single piece by her is different in some way. Like, there's nothing else like each individual piece that she wrote.
Yeah, it's a unique, and I think even the four movements of this sonata are kind of like that too.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about this piece is that we begin with the action. There's no preamble, there's no beating around the bush. It's very direct, it's very compelling, and so as soon as we start playing, allow yourselves to be transformed and transported, which is what the music does to me as soon as I hear it begin. Standpoint, that was the warm-up.
For you.
Right? So, the next piece in our program, and I'm really going to tell you about it. Give myself a chance. So, Ernest Bloch was a Swiss, Jewish-American composer whose music I've loved for most of my life. And I guess it was maybe 3 years ago, I was, as I do, because this is the kind of thing I do for fun, just going down the rabbit hole of underplayed violin sonatas on YouTube. Among us hasn't done that, right? And I came across this sonata mystique, or poem mystique, which is the second violin sonata. And I was immediately spellbound by this piece. And it's a strange piece. So the Tailleferre sonata that we just heard is in, you could say, either 3 or 4 movements. The third movement kind of elided into the fourth, 4 distinct sections. The poem mystique, Bloch's second sonata, is one super movement. The whole thing is about as long as all 4 of the movements of the Tailleferre combined. We strategically put the most music right at the beginning of the program before we took a break. And this piece is truly fascinating and more appropriate for a Unitarian Universalist congregation than I think I ever realized, because it turns out that poem mystique was composed during a drug trip, during which he meditated on the notion of universal spirituality, that spirituality transcends all religions and beliefs. Compelling enough for this cold, hard atheist to be deeply moved by the subject matter, too. And the piece itself is, it's exquisitely beautiful, it's extremely technically demanding, it's very emotionally driven. This piece was composed around the same, Bloch and Tailleferre were active around the same time, and so it's a fascinating look into some of the other music that was happening that was contrary to the academic music of the Second Viennese School, basically where atonal music killed classical music. My opinion. And there was so much truly incredible work being composed by composers who still believed that you could write melodies and beautiful harmony, and in fact expand the scope of what we understand as melody and harmony. The most interesting thing I think you're going to hear during the sonata is a reference to Gregorian chant. So again, Bloch was a Jewish composer but writing about universal spirituality. And this is actually an ancient plaint chant, Kyrie fons bonitatis, which is Lord, fountain of goodness. And in the middle of the piece, all of this kinetic energy comes to a halt, and you hear this beautiful chant melody emerge, and it's unmistakable. You will know. I thought that before the concert we might have actually played an excerpt for you to hear what to listen for, but you're going to know when you hear it. It is so obvious, and I'll be stunned if some of you are not moved to tears the way that I am. One more fun fact, unless you have anything to interject, Aaron. About a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago, I posted a practice video to Instagram. Me just playing one of the tougher passages of this piece. And the official Ernest Bloch page, a very illustrious page with lots of followers, shared my post to their story. But when I read the bio for this page, turns out it's managed by Bloch's great-granddaughter. And ever since, of course, I had to reach out. We've now been in touch, and she offered to answer any question that I have about Ernest Bloch that ever comes up. So I am in music nerd heaven right now. But again, this piece itself might, and this is saying a lot. I know we have at least one other big Ernest Bloch fan in the house. Maybe my favorite piece of his, and maybe my favorite violin sonata ever written. So again, as I invited you with the Tailleferre, please meditate on this one. Bloch has a lot to say.
fast. No, it only continues to amp up, but we're going to give all of you a break, as well as give us a couple of minutes to cool down something. Maybe 10 minutes, we'll resume.
Yeah.
But I'll be around, so let's talk music. Thanks. 10 minutes. Here we go.
that's for me. All right, we're going to begin the second half of our program, and it's really the last third, I think. You know, we figured for the sake of our stamina and your emotional stamina that we would program something a little bit lighter after the intermission. These are two short pieces by Lili Boulanger. Boulanger, well, I really have to clarify Lili because some of you know,
that she and her sister Nadia were a couple of very famous early 20th century teachers, early to mid 20th century teachers, composers. Lili is actually one of, I think she was the first female winner of the Rome Prize, which is one of the most esteemed composition prizes in the world. These two pieces in particular are, I think, in that same sort of vein that I was describing of Tailleferre's music, almost evocative of early impressionism and less encumbered by the jazz-heavy influences that started to infuse the French idiom of Ravel and Lessis. Would you agree with that assessment? We were identifying parts of Debussy that we thought were comparable. Not that it's in good taste to compare composers to other composers, but I think these two. The first piece is a nocturne. It's very slow. It's very lyrical, and the second cortege is very buoyant, joyful, and I think we'll pick you up a little bit after that deep, meditative, contemplative, and profound Bloch sonata.
Thank you.
But lovely music, right? It's just beautiful, melodic, captivating. The final piece of this program is Brahms' final violin sonata, and it's been a favorite of mine for many years. Brahms was famously, he didn't write music easily. He spent years and years and years laboring to create music that he liked, and actually famously threw out more music than he ever published. He only wrote 3 violin sonatas, which sounds like a perfectly hefty accomplishment, but not so significant, not so prolific in the greater scheme of violin composers. He only wrote 4 symphonies. He only wrote a handful of string quartets, a handful of chamber pieces. I think some of the greatest chamber music ever written. But this violin sonata I think it's more captivating to me than the first 2 because it encapsulates Brahms' sort of famous angst. Brahms, unlike Beethoven, who was kind of, everybody thinks of Beethoven as the angry, angsty composer. Brahms was the composer for whose angst was a byproduct of perhaps unrequited love. How many of you know the love triangle story of Brahms? Oh, this is good. This is good. One quick diversion. So Brahms was hailed by the great composer Robert Schumann by the mid-19th century, early in Brahms' life, as the spiritual successor to Beethoven, which did not help his fierce perfectionism. What also didn't help was that Robert's wife, Clara, who was another one of the greatest composers of the Romantic period, was the object of Brahms' desire. Brahms was in love with her, and the love was unrequited. I think it was Brahms' C minor piano quartet, wherein he requested that the publisher print an image of a man holding a gun to his head because he was so troubled over his love for Clara. He took 10 years to write his F minor piano quintet. I don't actually know how long it took, but he famously took years and years and years to write anything. But the point of all of this is that what he did write was absolutely perfect. Not saying it's everyone's favorite music, although for a lot of you it would be.
It should be.
Should be, or should be, perhaps. I wanted to quickly walk you through this sonata, if you don't mind playing a couple of excerpts, so you can hear what it's going to do. It's no longer than the Tailleferre or than the Bloch, but it's subdivided in a slightly different way. So the opening, why don't we just play a couple measures of the opening? You can hear the character. It's perfect music. It's beautiful, it's dynamic, it's emotional. The second movement is almost, I'm going to say something really sacrilegious, it's almost a little cheesy, but it's not, because it's also so perfect and beautiful and composed with such complicated orchestration. The melody is almost entirely in the violin and almost entirely on the lowest string, the G string, which is extremely hard to play, and very rich, very, you could almost imagine this as an unrequited love song to Clara. Well, that's what I mean. It doesn't come across that way because the harmony, the orchestration is so beautiful. The third movement, now the piano gets to have the fun. And it's not labeled a scherzo or a musical joke, but it kind of has that affect. It's very buoyant, it's very impulsive, I think, and harmonically brilliant. Which I think, whether that is a descriptor that resonates with you or not, is something you'll perceive because it's endlessly interesting. Is pure fire. So, the Brahms Third Sonata for violin and piano. You know, the thought crossed my mind as I was playing. So, please, I encourage all of you to check out the Illumine concert series calendar, which you can find at MLUC.org. Marvin here is reminding me that we have a very special event coming up. I assume that's what we're talking about. In a couple of weeks on Sunday, the 21st of September, we have a klezmer band, or a band that plays klezmer among other things, from Ukraine coming to help raise money for the children of Ukraine through Common Man for what is it again?
Common Man for Ukraine.
Common Man for Ukraine.
For the poor orphans in Ukraine.
So, it's going to be klezmer and Ukrainian music, and it's going to be a ton of fun here Sunday, the 21st of September at 6 o'clock. Please check out our website for a hell of a good cause. For a hell of a good cause, absolutely. Thanks, everyone.